Hello, welcome to Take a Wander with Shebs. On this edition of the podcast, I have Lisa Jansen, who is a digital nomad, and she's written a book about her travels in New Zealand on a campervan. The book is called Life Done Differently, a one-woman's journey on the road less travelled. Before we go into the discussion, here's how you can support the channel. You can support the channel by heading over to www.shebsthewanderer.com. You'll be able to see the store tab, which you can hover over to and click. You can then buy various items from t-shirts, jumpers, hoodies, even water bottles and phone cases. If you have any questions, you can send me a message through the contact tab. Lisa, thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time. I was telling everybody in the intro about your book, but before we go into all of that, how are you and where in the world are you currently?
Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. Really looking forward to having a chat. So right now I am in Auckland in New Zealand. I'm not usually based here. I just flew up for a week. But yeah, so Auckland, New Zealand's biggest city, is where I am right now.
Fabulous. New Zealand is a place that I have not quite been to, and I was nearly there about 8-9 years ago, but it didn't quite happen. Just want to ask you, where people who might not know who you are, just to tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a digital nomad and an author. I've spent almost 5 years living in a campervan, traveling around New Zealand, and now I'm a full-time house sitter, so still traveling around just in a bit of a different way. And yeah, I've recently published my third book, which is called Life Done Differently, and tells the story of my somewhat unusual lifestyle.
Well, we'll come on to that, and your book, which I have read, which is absolutely fabulous, and we'll come on to how you got about doing that and your life living in a campervan, or well, van life, as you call it within the book. But how did you first fall in love with travel? Because you're not actually from New Zealand. Whereabouts are you from in the world, and how did you end up in New Zealand?
Yeah, so I was born in Germany, and even though we weren't sort of a very, traveling family, my mom's really into traveling, so she just like instilled it in us early on, and just like an excitement for it. And so my traveling, I guess, started when I was 16, and I went to South Africa for like a student exchange for 2 months. So that was sort of my first, big overseas trip, and really experiencing different culture and different people, and just really enjoyed, that experience. And then when I was at university, I decided that I wanted to spend a semester or two overseas, as a lot of students do these days. And I just fell in love with New Zealand. Loved it so much, and ended up staying here. But one of the great things about like living in New Zealand when your home is in Germany, sort of going back was always an opportunity to travel. So whenever I would go to visit family, I'd stop over in Asia or stop over in the US, and see the world a little bit that way, and use the days when you're at uni and you've got those 3 months breaks in between semesters. I'd often use that time to go travel, and then stop by family in Germany, and then continue on travel. And so then eventually it's just kind of became more traveling locally in New Zealand, which is such an amazing country. So you kind of, why go anywhere else, if you've got like paradise on your doorstep?
As I said before, I haven't quite been to New Zealand. I almost went about 9 years ago. What is it about New Zealand that is so appealing?
It's so many different things. Like, first of all, like, it's just an incredibly beautiful place. And I think just does something to you, like your happiness and your emotional well-being, to just be in a beautiful place, see the ocean all the time. And, I think as far as that sort of beauty in nature goes, we've just got it all. We've got beautiful beaches, we've got, snow-covered mountains, lakes, forests, like hiking. Like, anyone who's into the outdoors is going to love New Zealand. If you love big cities and that sort of stuff, then, you're not really, it's not the place to go. But yeah, if you love nature, it's just amazing. People are really friendly. It's a really, it feels like quite a sort of relaxed, laid back lifestyle. And it's a really safe place to travel, especially as a woman on your own. So many reasons why New Zealand's a great place.
One of the things, obviously, because you are so far away from family, friends, did that initially take a little of getting used to it, or because you were in university, you were making friends anyway? Was it just an easy transition?
Yeah, so the first year was really easy because it was just supposed to be a year. And, I think as anyone who's ever done sort of a study abroad year knows, you just meet people so easily, because everyone's sort of in that same boat. Everyone's in a foreign country and you're in it together. And then at the end of the year, when I decided to stay in New Zealand and everyone else, went back home. That was sort of a bit harder. At that point, I kind of had to make a bit more of an effort to get involved and meet some locals and, people who are here permanently. But I just joined, a couple of clubs and moved into a shared house with, other Kiwis just, found it then relatively easy to, build a group of friends here. And now it's been, 17 years. So I've got a lot more friends in New Zealand now than I have in Germany.
Before I come into the book that I read, Life Done Differently, One Woman's Journey on the Road Less Traveled, you actually have a job or had a job within your career path, and you in this book you actually talk about how you started your career, and tell everybody what it was. And also you've actually written 2 books prior to this, so tell us how you went about getting those published and getting those commissioned.
I have a career in marketing, so I finished uni and started working in marketing, relatively normal jobs as you do. And then when I made that decision that I'm gonna start to live in the camper van, I initially quit my job, and then kind of what happened, and we can go into more detail if people are interested in that. But essentially what happened is that I realized I can do what I do remote. So now my main job is I'm a virtual marketing manager, and I just work for a few different clients. Every now and then I have to be in the office with them, but most of the time it's just all virtual, which obviously works really well for my lifestyle. As I started to live in the van and travel and had, much more time and didn't have sort of that stressful life anymore that I had in the city before, it just really gave me an opportunity to spend more time writing, which has always been a passion and sort of a hobby. And all of a sudden, I had the time. And so that's kind of how I came to write the first book. It wasn't really planned. It was just, I had the time. And so before I knew it, I was kind of writing a book. And then once I'd, written that, I went through the process of querying agents and publishers, and anyone who's ever tried doing that knows it's a very, disheartening process at times. Like you just have to accept so many rejections, and a lot of the time don't even get an answer at all. But eventually, as I was sort of, you're just about to give up, I got an offer from a publisher in the UK. So they published my first book, which is called One Size Does Not Fit All. And then I also started writing for a travel magazine here in New Zealand. So kind of started to develop a second income stream as a writer, which was really awesome, or really is really awesome. And so writing for the travel magazine then kind of led to the second book, which is called The Nomad's Ultimate Guide to New Zealand. And that's sort of the guidebook to anyone who wants to travel in a motorhome caravan in New Zealand. So wrote that with the second publisher here in New Zealand. And then when, wrote the third book, which is the memoir, Life Done Differently, I actually decided to self-publish this one for, a lot of different reasons that, would take up another half hour to get into all the details. But ultimately came down to, because it is a memoir, it's a super personal story. And I didn't want to sell the rights to it. I wanted to keep control of it.
I want to take it back slightly and ask you a little bit about how you wanted to go into the life of Campervan. You were working full time, because I don't want to give away too much in the book. As I said, I want people to go buy the book and read it. But you had an urge, and in the book you talk about how life is short, and if you don't do it now, then you might look back in life. Because at the time when you were saying you were enjoying your job, everything was great, but you just thought that there's something missing, and you were in your early 30s when you decided to. Well, actually, you were very lucky because you actually said that your job allowed you to work 15 hours a week remotely at the time when not many people were working remotely, and remote working or hybrid working is now a thing in life now. But at that time, they allowed you to say, right, okay, we're very, very supportive in what your decision is. You only live once, really. Go for it. And so tell people why you thought Campervan was the way forward. Why not go abroad? Why not take a year out or take 2 years out and just travel the world, going from one place to another, budget travel, or whatever you could do, whatever you can afford? But why was it you wanted to stay in New Zealand? What was it that appealed to you again about the country that you wanted to take that journey within the country?
I get asked this quite regularly. So I was 33, and just sort of wanting to figure out what you do with your life if I would decide that I don't want to do the traditional, settle down get married, have a kid, a mortgage kind of lifestyle. And so I spent a few months just like thinking about all sorts of ideas, and like traveling overseas was one of them, and like move to a new city, and just like all sorts of ideas were kind of in my head. And then at some point it still like sort of seems really weird like thinking back to it. At some point I had this idea, so I'm going to buy a camper van and travel around New Zealand, and I have no idea really where it came from. Like it wasn't something friends were doing, or I didn't even know that like hashtag van life was a thing on Instagram. So no idea really where it came from, but it was just one of those things where I had the idea and I just knew, that was it. It felt so right. And from there, like everything just sort of started to fall into place, and it just felt like, so, I was doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing at that point in my life. And so that was kind of the main reason that I did it in New Zealand, because it just felt right. But I also think the other kind of more practical part to it is like if you from New Zealand, right, if you want to travel internationally, you have to fly. We're an island, and I'm right now traveling around the country with all my gear. Like I've got a bike, a stand-up paddleboard, a surfboard, kite surfing gear, hiking gear, all that stuff. And I love that. I love having all of that with me, and like, using that to explore the country. And I couldn't do that if I, go overseas and you fly. You have to sort of pick, maybe one of those things to take with you. So I really love that, in New Zealand, I can just like load it all like in the camper van, or now I just load it all in the car, and then, have all the fun stuff with me.
A lot of the time when you decide to quit your job, you may have some savings. Again, because we'll come on to this actually, because you talk about the financial worries as the years went on. The initial first stages of finances might be great, but as time goes on, you might think, well, where's the next income going to come? But you were quite fortunate. You were able to work 15 hours a week with the job that you had, and they allowed you to do that. And that was the big thing that allowed you to travel extensively within New Zealand.
Yeah, look, it was awesome, and definitely very fortunate. And it was, obviously, so at the time I was working for a tech startup. And I think most people know startups tend to sort of be a bit more flexible with these sort of things often. And I had a really good relationship with the CEO, worked together really well. Basically, I did quit. So I did, tell the CEO, this is what I want to do, and this is why I'm resigning. And then, he was like, well, actually, could we talk? Like, would you consider doing some work remotely while you're traveling? And of course I was like, yeah, that would be amazing. So, so really lucky. And it did kind of open my eyes to this whole idea of remote working. But I'm definitely very lucky when it comes to work. I work very hard for it too, but it all sort of kind of fell into place for me, for sure.
Having the job security is fantastic. One of the things you talk about extensively within the book is, and you mentioned it already actually, not having the traditional lifetime, so life done differently, as you've called the book. And you talk about not going down the traditional route of getting married, having kids, which is something that I can relate to, because I didn't want to get married, didn't want to have kids straight away. Not necessarily, that doesn't mean that I don't want them, by the way, but I wanted to explore, and which I have done. But in the book as well, you talk about your friends. They started getting married, they started having kids. And one of the things you actually talk about is the fact that you're very happy for them, but however, they have to look after the kids, obviously. And just the impact of your life changing, and you realize that was changing, especially whilst you were living the van life. And but looking back on that now, and obviously you've written that in the book, would you say to yourself that that is a part of life where we evolve, we grow, but it's up to myself then to potentially make friends in a cycle where I can possibly have their full attention? Or is that just part of life where people will get married and you just have to evolve with your friends and accept the fact that they're going to have kids and other? Because I to be honest with you, I've found the same, where I don't see friends as much as I used to because life changes.
Yeah, I think it's something that, if you're in that position where and so for me, when it all started, like at the beginning of the journey or the book, I was kind of similar to you. I wasn't saying I definitely don't want that. I just felt like I wasn't ready for it yet. And so I sort of, throughout the journey that I then went on, I landed on a definitely don't want kids. But I think, when you're in that situation and all your friends are following that path and you're not, you have a choice to make, right? You either have to, in a way, give up on the friendship and find new friends that are in a similar phase than you are, or you have to accept that the friendships are changing and evolving. And so for me, giving up on the friendships was never really an option, especially the really close ones. And so I've just accepted it and evolved with it. And I really enjoy being part of it too. Because I'm in Auckland right now where I used to live, I've been spending a bit more time with my friends and their kids, and, was babysitting on Saturday evening, and actually really, enjoy being part of that and spending time with the kids. But yeah, I think you do have to accept that the friendships will change. It'll probably be a lot more on you to kind of make the effort to come to them and, make time to see them, because, they're going to be very busy and they maybe might not travel as much or as easily anymore. Apparently leaving the house gets really hard when you have two kids, whereas, I can just hop in the car and drive over. So for me, it was, definitely a bit of a period of adjustment. And I would say I'm also really, really glad that I did decide to do the, get the van and travel, because that sort of gave me, a purpose and a mission while they were all, having their kids. I think if I had stayed in Auckland and I had continued with the sort of more traditional life, go to work, spend your weekends with your friends, I probably would have felt the impact much, much more. Whereas, I was having the best time, around living the dream, around New Zealand. And so I didn't feel the impact as much as I probably would have otherwise.
Well, everything that you just said there, one of the things you talk about extensively, because you see them having a family, your friends also asking you questions about whether you do want to settle down and whether you do want to have kids yourself. Is this a bit of a phase that you're going through? You did talk about a person that you did see, and after about 5 dates, it didn't quite work out. That's the other thing. Relationships is very difficult if you're on the road. Is it sustainable in that sense? Keeping a relationship when you're constantly traveling from one place to another. Have you tried to form relationships with more guys since the time you've written the book?
I would say with that specific relationship that's mentioned in the book, I think we were just. It was a good time, and we learned lessons from each other, but I don't think we ever were a fit to last long term, just regardless of life situations and lifestyles. And I think at that time also I was just very much just needing to do this adventure on my own, and needing to have that experience for myself. But I do say, and you bring up a really good point, is the biggest sort of downside of this lifestyle for me is how hard it is to build relationships, not just sort of in the romantical sense, but also, making new friends or just feeling connected to a community. Little things like, if you live somewhere permanently, you might join a club, or, you go volunteer somewhere. Or you go to the same coffee place every day. So, you sort of see familiar faces there, and just, so much easier to kind of build up relationships. And I'm definitely someone who, makes friends slowly. I need to see people, over and over again before I sort of really feel a strong connection and feel comfortable. And so I found that very hard. You meet a lot of amazing people, you travel around, lots of amazing people, but everyone's always on the move. So it is quite hard to build those relationships. And I always say that is probably the thing that's going to make me, settle somewhere at some point, at least, for a while, or at least have a base to travel from that return back to sort of have that community and that opportunity to connect with people and, relationships as well.
One thing I just picked up on there, you said it was difficult for you to build relationship. Because in the book, actually, you talk about being an introvert.
Yeah.
Now, that living a say quite an extravagant lifestyle on the road, you have to have some confidence and you have to be quite gregarious in that sense. But you call yourself an introvert. How does that come about with the confidence that you have? Do you not?
Yeah.
Because I sort of see you as quite a outgoing person.
So I think there is often still a bit of a misunderstanding around what it is, introvert versus extrovert. And a lot of people think that introverts are shy or, not confident, quiet. And in reality, really what it comes down to, the difference between introvert and extrovert is where you get your energy from. So extroverts get energy from spending time with people. So, they go to a party lots of people, and for them it's like really energizing. They feel really good and really, like, let's go to the after party and let's go to town after. Whereas for introverts, spending time with people takes energy. And that doesn't mean that they don't enjoy it. Like, I enjoy spending time with people, but it does take energy. So, at the end of a few hours spent with people, I feel drained and I need time on my own to recharge. And so that's the real, difference. So I'm confident. I can be very outgoing in the right situation, but I'm introverted in the sense that I need a lot of time on my own just to feel energized and feel good and feel balanced. I'm also one of those people who really enjoys time on her own. I'm very good at entertaining myself and doing things on my own and really sort of, get a lot of value out of that solitude.
Mentioned all of that. The thing what really, really fascinated me was, because I'll come on to the pandemic, because you talked about you like having time on yourself, because it's quite interesting because there's a point to this. But when you're traveling for an extended period of time, things will start going well. You'll always have things going right for you, but there'll always be something that goes wrong, and that's just part of travel. Because I've done long-term travel where things happen, and your camper van actually broke down. In fact, it had rust, and now rust. Your first van, actually, because you actually bought two. The first van had rust, and now rust, who people don't know, is a sign of death, really, for any machinery. And unfortunately, your first van had that. And because again, one of the things you talk about, again, I don't want to give away too much, but you class yourself as, well, technically homeless now. I have to go find a place to live, have to ask a friend. Now those sort of things you don't really have in the plans in your remit, and financially as well, by the way, it's going to be quite extensive. It's going to be hard on your pocket when that sort of situation comes, and it did happen for you. Your thought process again, did you think, this is now I have to go back to living the life of no longer a nomad, I have to go back to the full-time life, I have to go find a place, I gave up this life, I don't, what's going through your mind when something like that happens, where actually you're the main thing that is keeping you on the road pretty much dies?
Yeah, look, I think any van lifer or anyone who's, lived in a vehicle for an extensive period of time will, relate to this. It's like, it's one of the hardest things, when these, breakdowns happen. And in my case, it was rust in the van actually had to be written off. But, even like lengthy repairs and, the sort of the van's out of action and you kind of lose your home and your vehicle, is really disruptive. And I found it really hard. Luckily, sort of at the time when it happened, it was about 18 months into, the journey that I'd been on the road. And so at that point, I felt very comfortable in where I was at in life. And I had, the previous winter, discovered house sitting as an option to, in winter, get out of the van for a few weeks. And so I had sort of that as a, backup plan, I guess, ready. And I had, built up a really good portfolio of clients for work. And so I had at that point, a relatively reliable income. I mean, as a freelancer, it's never really fully reliable, but, I felt confident at that point that I could earn money as a freelancer, and I could, ramp that up. And that's exactly what I did. So that winter, I just basically, accepted all the work I could find and just, worked as much as I could in a house set. So in a way, it happened at a good time for me, where I was, confident and then I had these sort of, backup plans ready in the drawer, so to say. But yeah, it's definitely very tricky when, something happens to your van and it's your home for sure.
And the other thing as well, I was going to come on to this, was COVID hit and the pandemic came about, and you talk about it again in the book, where things just had to come to a halt. Because at one point you was like, I think you said you wrote a blog or something, and it said, I'm living normally, but then obviously, as we know, everything started to close down, and then you couldn't do essential travel unless it was essential. You couldn't travel, and that is another scenario where you don't plan for that sort of stuff. You can plan for potential vans breaking down or something happening to the van itself, and it's your home, as you said. But a pandemic is a whole different ball game for a lot of us, and it was really interesting to read a story about, because living in the UK, I was reading about New Zealand, how strict the rule was, and the fact that no one could go in, no one could leave, and it was just one of the strict. New Zealand and Australia was really, really strict. over a time period, the van life is, you mentioned it's great when you're on the road traveling. However, when you're static, it's a whole different level of mindset because you're in one place, you're stuck in a little van, and you talk about you maybe sometimes you go out for a couple of hours a day, but sometimes when it's raining, you don't. So it's a whole different level. Did you feel that? Actually, you do say that. Did you come to a point where you thought to yourself, "I'm just going to quit this and go back to living in a normal life, a traditional life, I should say." Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. So we, as you said, New Zealand had a very, very strict response to COVID, which kind of initially worked really well for us. So we had, a very strict first lockdown, and that was sort of fine for me. Like I was, ended up being stuck on a campground, and it wasn't all that bad. So I used the time to catch up with, people, made some new friends, and did some kind of creative projects. And then at the end of that, New Zealand was COVID free, so we had over a year, almost a year and a half of like living normal life while the rest of the world was fighting the pandemic, and we were, no one was coming in, no one was going out. But, within New Zealand, we were COVID free. We were living a fairly normal life. But then in the second half of 2021, COVID came back in, and we had another big lockdown, and I got, stuck in it again. And that time I really, really struggled with it. And it was what you talked about. And sort of for me, like I started to think about it, the difference between van life and living in a van. And so van life for me was all about, you're out, the adventure, seeing the country, it's exciting. Whereas living in a van was, literally like parked up in a paddock and working a lot, and just like living in this tiny space where, I was spending, 80, 90% of the time in the same spot, because I was, sleeping, eating, working, reading, watching TV, all in more or less the same spot. And so, yeah, so that was definitely I just started to think much more about the negatives of it. And you sort of kind of went down that pathway for a little bit. But, ultimately, we did get out of it, and I had an amazing summer on the South Island after that. So it got me back on track.
There was light at the end of the tunnel, and we were able to get back to some sort of normality. And the other thing that you talk about again in the book, and it's really, really interesting because I was talking to another travel blogger. She was telling me she did a bit of digital. She didn't class it as digital nomad. She classed it as starting up her business because her aim was to be part of the travel industry. And because you talk about the financial worries, because it's great living the camper van life, but you're in your mindset. You were saying security was another thing. Financial security was another big factor. Is it sustainable to have a digital nomad lifestyle? Can you do it for a sustained period of time, or is it a one-off sort of thing that you do once in your life where you go, or can you do it non-stop all your life? Is that possible? Because eventually, do you have roots? Is it possible to sort of carry on working remotely with the company? Are they going to start telling you to come back into the office? And the other question as well, there's a lot of questions here. Do you feel as though you're part of the travel industry? Because you said you're house sitting now, or do you feel as though you're a nomad who is not in the industry and doesn't really give much to the industry because you want to live the life of a nomad?
It's a good question. I've never really thought about it like that. Like I would say I'm sort of I'm in the I don't think I'm really in the travel industry anymore, because I don't actually engage with, tourism much. Like while I was living in the camper van, obviously, I'd regularly stay at campgrounds, and, I like cross path with a lot of tourists. And so you're sort of in that space. Whereas now house sitting is definitely different. I guess I'm still connected to the tourism industry. I still, write for a travel magazine, and I'm, still sort of engaged in that conversation, and get a lot of people reaching out, wanting to talk about traveling in New Zealand and that sort of stuff. So I guess right now I'm still connected to it, but I'm probably not living in it anymore.
If you look at the lifestyle you've done, and you've written a book on it,
yeah,
would you say though, writing a book and trying to inspire others to live the life that you've lived, in some respects you are within the industry because you've lived the life and you've written a book, and potentially this could help
yeah,
you get another commission to write another book or potentially do more articles. Travel is it's evolving as we speak. You're different to other people who just want to live that digital nomad lifestyle and just work different jobs, and they don't want to give anything back to the community, the industry. That's a whole different ball game. But you are very different in that sense, to me anyway, because you've gone out there, you've written a book, you write for digital magazines still, and you're talking about it on a podcast. So so there's a difference to you and someone else who's just doing it for the sake of just travel and just want to have fun. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely, want to inspire people to travel. And I keep joking that, I keep saying it's like I should be sponsored by Tourism New Zealand, because I always rave about how amazing New Zealand is. And
well, you should be.
Come here, so maybe one day. But no, definitely would say that in that way. Yeah, I'd say, when you put it like that, I'm like, yeah, I'm part of the tourism industry, travel industry.
And as I said, you could potentially go to New Zealand tourism board and say, you've done this, you've written a book, this is how successful you are, and why not sponsor me? I can help out the tourism sector because I've done this, done this, done this. You could definitely do that. And that's what I'm trying to say to you. A lot of young people come into me sort of saying, what advice would you give me? I always say, well, if you've got a sustainable job right now and you want to be part of the industry, you have to build it. You have to build a brand. So I was talking to you about my friend. I was talking about, she built her business. She built her brand equity. So brand equity is so important, and it takes time to do. You've been at this for like 4, 5, 6 years. You're starting to make movement, so it takes time. It took me 4 or 5 years just to sort of get off the road. Well, actually, it took me longer. So it takes time to sort of, and then next thing you know, you will start getting tourism boards getting to you and saying, oh, hang on a second, this person's doing it amazingly. PRs, then you start getting book deals, then you start getting articles, people asking you to write articles. Anything can happen. So you have to build initially, and then it's sustainable, I would say. So then you can live that digital nomad lifestyle. There's Nomadic, I think, what's his name? Matt Kepnes, the Nomadic lifestyle. I can't remember the handle, but he goes back 15, 20 years ago where nobody was living nomadically. Well, I suppose there were people living nomadically, but no one was making money from it. And it's anything is possible if you have the right mindset, if you have the long-term business goal. Anything is achievable, in my opinion. And if there was any advice, if there was any single little small advice that you'll give, well, not small, any advice that you want to give to someone after living this lifestyle.
If I think about like what's been most beneficial for me, it's been at my network, right? So being able to tap into that network, and sometimes I sort of look back and it's like it feels like even 10, 12 years ago, I like subconsciously made the right decisions to prepare myself to be a nomad one day, even though I wasn't planning for it at all. But, I've got a very good network in New Zealand. And so that's, I think, the number one thing I would urge people to think about, like, how can you build your network? How can you connect to the right people? And, you got to invest the time, like you say. And you got to, if you think about the people who are, successful as travel bloggers or, in that sort of space around that, they're the ones that, they do a lot more than just, the odd social media post, right? A lot of the time they've put so much effort into it before they ever saw any, return on that effort. You often kind of look at these overnight successes, but if you really look at it, it's actually been like thousands of hours before there was success. So that'd be the second thing for me. It's like, you got to be prepared for that. And so, I think for a lot of people that I know where they've been successful, it started as a side gig, so they have another income stream that sort of pays the bills, and then they use their free time to build up that network and the platform, and and then at some point, it starts to bring in some money, and they can cut back on the other job, and then eventually maybe transition over completely. So hard work. I wish I had a shortcut. I know lots of people are hoping for a shortcut, but I don't.
There's no such thing as shortcut. You have to, the key thing is you have to work hard. You're going to have to initially work hours and hours and hours, all hours of the day, 7 days a week, to build your portfolio, your brand. And that is the key part of being sustainable then, because you have to work different, maybe you have to work 5, 6 different jobs. I see us a lot of the time is sort of like the entertainment industry, where if you think about the Hollywood industry, where they're working as a waiter, waitress, they're working this, that,
Yeah.
but they're still acting at the same time. And there's that very famous story with Jim Carrey where he wrote himself a $5 million check or $10 million check, and he said went on Oprah and said, "This is what I wrote." And he was living out of his car because he's working various different jobs, but it took him 8 years of hard work to get to that position. And as you also mentioned there, an overnight success. There's no such thing as overnight success, because people don't see the foundation that they've built, the seeds that they've sort of planted, and it takes time. And you just answered that question. You have to work hard, and without hard work, you're not going to achieve anything. I also say is, don't listen to those naysayers as well. Don't listen to anyone that says you can't do this, you can't do that. And also, that's another thing as well. You talk in the book, you're talking about how maybe potentially you have to maybe let people go, and you also talk about in the book how you might miss family and friends. But if you've got a goal in life, you have to make those sacrifices. And again, in the book, you talk about sacrifices. Sacrificing for your goal is very, very important. And if you can't sacrifice, then unfortunately you probably won't get to the position that you want to get to. You have to take risk in life, I would say, as well.
Absolutely, totally agree. Yeah, I think sometimes, these days we're sort of in this, and sometimes it feels like we live in a culture where people sort of expect to be able to get everything without any consequence or any sacrifice or any downside, and like it should just be all like available to us. But the reality is it's not. Like, the good stuff you need to work for, and yeah, like you say, you need to sacrifice for, and you need to accept some consequences. And for me, like, I want to live in New Zealand and I love it here, but one of the consequences is that I'm very far away from my family in Germany. So yeah, it's just you can't really have it all most of the time. Most of the time you're going to have to make some sacrifices and figure out what matters most to you and go after that.
But things might change going forward, and that's the thing. So you might be far away, but there might be a time in the future where you might be able to see them more often, because financially you might be in a better position. Your career could take off, and you might have many different book offers. And that's the thing. Things might be different for the 5 years or whatever, but eventually, if you have, I say this, and I really, people listening and hopefully listening in, getting this point. If you really have the mindset for it, it will happen. And that's the thing, you see. Don't listen to those naysayers, I say. And I don't want to give away too much now on the book. So I want people to go buy it. And again, it's called Life Done Differently, One Woman's Journey on the Road Less Travel. And tell people where they can find it currently and where they can purchase it.
Pretty much anywhere you'd buy your book, especially online. Like, stores can order it in too, but online's usually the better option. So Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Apple Books, wherever you get your books. I also have a website called lifedonedifferently.com, so you can go there, learn more about the book, and then there's links to where to buy, and you can connect to me. I always love to hear from people from all over the world.
Well, I wish you the best of luck. Before, again, I let you go, where can people find you? Mentioned the website. How can people follow you as well?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook and Instagram as Life Done Differently NZ. So you got to add the NZ, New Zealand, NZ for people in the US, I've learned. And yeah, follow me there, follow my nomadic life, see how beautiful New Zealand is. You're going to want to come down here and see it for yourself.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your time. I've really loved reading the book. Again, people listening, please go buy it. The book is fantastic. You will learn something about the nomadic lifestyle and also just life in general. So thank you so much, and I'll speak to you very soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell button to never miss an episode, and watch all my previous episodes from the show. You can also follow me on all my social media platforms. That's it for Take a Wando Chefs. Hope to see you all soon. Until next time, bye for now.